Welcome to another video on Chessmate. Today we're going to be looking at how to checkmate with a lone king and a rook. Okay, so the way we go about this is we just want to follow the 3 steps we would normally follow when checkmating at the end game. Step 1 is to push the king to the edge. Step 2 is to keep the king on the edge, and step 3 is to deliver a checkmate. So we'll start with step 1, of course. So we want to push the king to the edge of the board. Now obviously the black king is sitting right here, and we want this king to be on one of the edges of the board. So we would like it perhaps to be, along this edge here. Perhaps instead we'd like it on this edge. It really doesn't matter, but as we can see, the king is, actually pretty close to these 2 edges, so we want it to sit on one of these edges at the top of the side of the board. We don't really want to push the king towards the bottom of the board because that's where our king is. So normally we want to push the king to the edge of the board away from our own king. That's going to be a lot easier. So let's just decide now, let's push the king to the top of the board. So quite simply, we don't want the king coming down to, either of these squares or these 3 squares. So let's just stop that right away, and we'll simply move our rook up here. So that's done. We can see that this rook is going ahead and it's having a laser all across the board, and that means the king cannot come down, which is what we want. So if the king comes down, that's illegal move, that's illegal move, and that's illegal move. So all these squares, we just cannot move there because of this laser across the board stopping the king moving down. So it's black's move. Black does not want to go to the edge of the board because black knows that if he does go to the edge of the board, he'll likely be checkmated. So he'll just try and stay in the middle somewhere. So he'll maybe move to this square. So let's leave our rook here. The rook's doing a good job keeping the king coming down the board. So now we need the help of our own king. So let's come up closer. So again, the black king just wants to sort of stay in the middle. But what happens if the black king actually comes over and hassles our rook? Well, right now it's not a problem. The rook is safe, so we can still bring our king closer to the center of the board, to the opposing king. Now it's black's turn. Okay, so now black has moved here. He is attacking our rook. So we don't want to lose it, obviously. So what we do is very simple. We just swing the rook across to the other side of the board. And so now we maintain this laser beam along the 5th rank. Okay, so then just as before, the king cannot actually come down. Now the king's going to move one of these squares. He's got 5 squares to choose from, so let's just say the king comes over here. Now we need to bring our king a little closer, of course, otherwise we're not going to get any progress. So we'll bring the king up. Now we have 2 or 3 choices. We can bring the king closer by coming to this square, or we could go to this square. They're both fine. One's much better. Now we decide which one is better by looking at where the other king stands and looking ahead a couple of moves. So let's just have a look at this. If we go to this square, then that's fine. If the king comes across, then it's of course our move, which we'd prefer if this king was actually this black king was actually sitting on this square. We'd prefer that, or we'd prefer if our white king was sitting on this square. Because the reason for that is because in this position, if we actually move our rook, let's say up one square, then the problem is the king can actually come down here. So we don't want that. So let's go back a move. So just to say, if our white king was sitting on this square, then the best part about that is that it would prevent the white king going here. Okay, so the white king could not go there because our king was sitting on that blue circle square. So let's go back 2 moves. So remember, we had the choice. Do we want to go here or do we want to go here? Now the best one would be to come to this square, because now we know that we're just a knight's move away from the other king, and sort of like an L shape, and it means that when it's black's move, black has, I guess, 3 choices. Black can go up the board, and we'd be happy with that because we want the king to go to the edge of the board. So if the black king goes to any of these 3 squares, we'll be quite happy. Now let's say instead the king comes to this square, we'd also be happy. Let me show you why. If the king comes to this square, then we've reached an excellent point. Now, the whole reason that we were leaving our rook along this rank, the reason we were leaving our rook along this rank was to prevent the king coming down the board. Remember, we wanted him to go up the board. So here we can see that with the two kings facing each other, what this means is that our white king is doing right now the same job as the rook. So the rook prevents the king coming down, and the king does the same thing. So these squares are protected by the king, white king, and the rook. So that's actually excellent. It means that the rook's done its job. The rook can now actually leave this square and go up one square and attack all these squares along here. And we still have the white king protecting these squares. So the king cannot move here, and cannot move here. So that means the black king only has these 3 choices to move up the board. Let's go back a couple of moves. So what if the actual black king decides not to go to this square, but instead go to this square? So what we do? Well, it's actually rather easy. So the king's moving across the board. All we have to do is simply follow the king. And we follow the king, and we follow, and the king can't keep going in that direction. So now the black king only has 3 choices. 1, 2, 3. If he goes up the board, we're happy. That's the whole plan. We want to push the king up the board. If the king comes to the side, then we're back to the similar situation where the kings are facing each other, and the king simply cannot go to any of these 3 squares because of 2 reasons. One, that the white king is preventing going here, because we know that, if the king does try and go to any of these squares, it'll be checked because kings can't check each other. And doubly, the rook is here attacking these squares as well. So it's white's move. The rook has done its job. The king is in the perfect position to stop the king coming down, so we can move our rook up the board, check, forcing the king up the board. Okay. So only 3 squares to choose from. Black can go here, here, or here. Let's just say the king goes to this square. Now, the rook's doing a great job. We don't want to move the rook, so let's leave the rook where it is. It's protecting all of these squares, so don't move the rook for now. We need the king to come closer to help out. So where do we go? We have 3 choices to come up the board. We could move here, we could move here, we could move here. All 3 are fine, but there's one is the optimal move. So the optimal move would certainly be this square. Let's just see if we go instead here. Now, there's a small problem, a very small problem. This looks great. We got the kings facing each other, so that means we can just move up here and check along here, right? However, it's not our move, it's black's move. So if black moved here and we moved across, then it looks great. They're facing each other, but so we can just go here and check. No, we can't. It's not our move. So it's black's move, and we don't want to keep on repeating. So we would have to actually find a way to avoid repeating. So we would actually need to move the rook, 1 square here, or even all the way over to the other side of the board. So let's just go back a moment. So we have these choices. So let's say, we choose the optimal choice and we go here. Okay. Now, the king, the black king, he has a few squares to choose from. So the king can go to here, here, or here. And any of those squares would be perfect because that's the whole point. We want the king to go to the edge of the board. Now, if the king goes to this square, we'd be very happy because the kings will be facing each other, and that means the king is preventing, our white king is preventing the black king coming down the board. So all these 3 squares would be, attacked by the white king. So the black king could not come to any of them. In which case we can just bring the rook up here to check along the 7th rank. So let's say instead the king moves to the side of the board over here. Now I said side of the board. So our original plan was to push the king to the very top of the board, which is still a good plan. If we want to, we can actually speed things up. So normally we would come across, as I showed you earlier, we would sort of come across to here, and then that's going to allow the kings to face each other. So that's a good move. But we can have a sort of a bit of a shortcut, and we can actually move our rook up 1 square. Now, that might seem a little odd because the whole point was that at the beginning, we decided that we're going to move the king up the board to the top of the board there. And by making this move here, we're actually allowing the king to come down the board. So why would we do that? The reason for this is because the king is very restricted, and we can make a clever move. We can make a waiting move. We can just move the rook 1 square. So leave the king where it is. We can move the rook 1 square, and that will mean that the black king has only 1 square to move to. That's the only square. Just cannot go here. Cannot. So these squares the black king cannot go to. So the black king could only move to this square here. Which actually is a perfect thing for white because now the king is on the edge of the board. That's step 1. Step 2 was keep the king on the edge of the board. Now the white king is doing the perfect job of that. The white king is, preventing the black king moving to all of these squares. So black king cannot move to any of these 3 squares, which means we reached step 3, which is deliver checkmate. So bring the rook all the way across, and that is indeed checkmate. Now let's just go back a moment. So we played rook to a7, and the king's in check. And we know that if the king comes this way, we're going to win quickly. So what we'll do now is we'll just have a look if the king happens to move up the board, say to this square. So we have a question. We can move our king up the board. We can go to this square or to this square. So which square shall we go to? They're both fine. The optimal move will be this square. This is the optimal square to move to. Okay, that's going to lead to the quickest checkmate. But okay, let's just say, you know, we just instead go here. Let's just figure out how we're going to win from here, because, you know, sometimes we might not make the perfect move, but we still want to win. So let's just see what we can do. So we know that this looks perfect, but it's not actually our move. If it was our move, we just move up one square, checkmate. So it is black's move. So if black was, you know, a little careless and moved to the corner of the board, then we'd be happy and that would be checkmate. But black's probably not going to do that. Black's probably going to move over here. And we know that there's not much point in chasing the king, because he's just going to move back and forth, and this is not going to help at all. So let's not go here. So this square, let's just not go there, okay? Let's do something else. So what we do is we need to make a kind of waiting move. So we're not going to move our king, we're going to move the rook. Now we could move the rook, you know, to this square. That's probably fine. But the problem would be, I guess, that if we do come here, then the king might come over and, you know, hassle our rook, and we don't want that. So instead, we'll do something better. We're actually going to go all the way over to the side of the board. So we're swinging the rook, and now it's nice and safe. So basically, when we're in this kind of situation, we swing the rook over so that our king is closer to our rook than the other king. So this is great, because now we know that if the king comes here face to face, then we deliver checkmate. If the king moves across, we just chase, we chase, we chase, and we chase. So now black's move, only one square to move to, which is back to the square he came from on b8. We're face to face, and the rook can move up right now and deliver a checkmate. So this is one way we can checkmate with a rook and a king versus a lone king. There is another method which we can call the box method, which we can look in another video, but this is a very easy and logical way to checkmate with a rook and king, which will allow you to win lots of games which end up in this very common situation where we're left with only just a rook and a king versus a lone king. So thank you for watching, and tune in again for more videos from Chess Bites.